afternoon. I'm Al McFarland. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarland. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to have you along as well. Well, we want to always begin these programs inviting you to support this wonderful work. What do you mean wonderful work? We're having great conversations with people around the country, around the neighborhood, and around the world about things that matter. And we want to have your voice joining our voices, reflecting on, contemplating, thinking about, bringing solutions forward in our personal, individual lives, but also in our collective experience. Our common and shared vision is making a better place for all of us as human beings, as members of the human family. Well, today's program is a wonderful program. We're going to talk about some things that have to do with health and that have to do with international community as well. I'm pleased to start the program with my colleague and friend, Carmen Robles. And Carmen, among other things, produces a program called Conversaciones de Salud, a wonderful program that focuses on health concerns, opioids, alcohol, tobacco, other drugs, the impact of those in our community, but really has a focus on addressing the health awareness and knowledge of young people in particular and their families. Carmen, buenos días, ¿cómo estás? Mi
Buenos
hermana, ¿cómo va?
días, Mr. Mac. ¿Cómo estás, maestro querido?
Todo va bien conmigo. Everything is going well with me, and it's so good to see you again, as always.
Gracias.
Y como siempre, debemos hablar en español y también en inglés. Let's talk in Spanish and English because I call this a chance to practice every time. And I love the opportunity to use my Spanish. I get better by the minute.
Yes, you do. It's increíble.
Increíble.
Congratulations. You hit those Cuban roots, didn't you?
Claro. Well, let me talk about you for a second. So you're from Brooklyn, but you're Boricua. Puerto Rican descent. Right now, St. Paul is home for you. And you, my friend, a mom, a grandmom, an accomplished journalist, an entrepreneur, recognized in Twin Cities as a community activist, but also having been a player in various levels of government. Carmen, you're also a writer. You are a director and a broadcaster. You mentioned already Conversaciones de Salud. And with me, Afrodescendientes, and you specialize in Afro-Latino affairs. You're an engaging, motivational speaker, public speaker, and you do that through your own consulting firm. Your background is in public relations and multicultural marketing, as well as in youth development. You've gained a lot of national attention for the work you've done. As an author, you've presented I Am a Rican.
I'm a Rican.
Okay. A collection of articles as the Afrodescendientes editor for Insight News, and you've augmented that with personal journal entries and poems about your battle with breast cancer and the journey to find your Puerto Rican roots. American pays homage to her late brother, Luis Mario Robles Jr. Carmen, what are you working on right now? We got stuff to come back to, but right now, what's top of mind and top on your plate at the moment?
Well, I'm really want to delve into diabetes. And, of course, opioids, fentanyl, track, substance use disorder. But my sister recently passed away due to diabetes and kidney failure. So I'm thinking that in creating awareness for diabetes, oftentimes we think someone may be on drugs because they're acting different and they're sluggish, sleeping a lot, but it could be their glucose. It could be something as simple as diabetes. So that's my new venture and in bringing awareness to la comunidad latina, Afro-Latina, Latinx, Latin, Afro-Nativo. So thank you.
Well, let's use that as a segue to bring our first other guest in today, and that is Carol Mellom. And she's also a community activist. She's been with a group called Health Policy Advocates since it was founded about 8 years ago. It's nonpartisan, meaning that some of its members see themselves as Democrats, some as Republicans, some as independents, and some as Green Party members. And we want to just take a minute to introduce again health policy advocates and the priorities that this collection of friends brings to the public sphere. Carol, how you doing? Good to see you. Welcome to the Conversation with Salud Afro.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And yes, we started to find out why the managed care organizations have never had an outside audit so that people can see how much they spend on each patient and how much they're given by the government for that. And just a couple of months ago, or a year and a half, I think maybe, but the Office of Inspector General came out with after a study of 37 states MCOs, and found out that they have a high rate of rejections of procedures recommended by the doctors, that appeals take a long time. And so this is delayed healthcare. And also the audit part is they are not following the GAP rules, which is generally accepted accounting practices.
Mm-hmm.
And so after spending many years actually finding this out, because what MCOs do is very complicated, and it is very confusing for a lot of people, and it takes a long time to really unthread this. And
well,
so
let's take a minute, Carol, and do some defining groundwork here. Easy to use terms like MCO and not really know what it means. So let me ask you to describe the lay of the land. One of the things we want to talk about was, what is an MCO? Define that, and how does an MCO differ from what we might think of, what the common person might think of as a regular health plan? How does it differ from a hospital or a clinic? So talk about each of those elements of the healthcare delivery system.
well, I know that most of us understand MCOs as being HMOs way back in the 70s and early 80s that this was started.
So here we go with acronyms. MCO, Managed
yes,
Care Organization, right?
yes, Managed
And
Care Organization.
HMO is Health Maintenance Organization, right?
Exactly.
So name some MCOs, because I think that's still just academic at this moment, but we know what brands are out there. Which brands qualify as MCOs or HMOs that people would recognize?
Which what?
Which organizations or companies or businesses or brands are what you and we are defining as an MCO?
Well, group health is, which is no longer group health, but what is it? United Health, or Health Partners, Alina, UCare. Alina is a series of care organizations like hospitals and clinics. And it's UCare that is the insurance company. And it's all, yes, it is very confusing. Fairview got rid of the one insurance company they had, which was Preferred One, I believe, and it's changed that. It's kind of a very fluid thing, but Health Partners is certainly the most well-known and probably has the largest share of people in its network.
And then, the question is, an organization, is there a distinction between an organization like Health Partners, for example, and what people might have known as a quote unquote regular health plan? What's the difference, or is there a difference anymore?
Well, I don't think there is. And I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. Okay. But these are mostly insurance companies that we all get, because that's the way our healthcare system has gone. Instead of the old fee for service for everyone, these insurance companies came along and said, hey, we can manage this for you. And we would do a much better job in all this and that. This was back in the late 70s onto 80s when companies, because that's where we get most of our healthcare plans from, did just that, as the government did, as the legislature did. They said, sure, we'll give you the money and you take care of the patients. So that's essentially what happened. It's no longer people going into any doctor they want, getting a service, and then having the government pay those people directly. And
So you're supporting what's called a freedom to choose bill. Is that what it is?
That's right. That's right.
Explain that. Let's tell people. And Carmen, if you have a question, jump in.
Thank you, Carol, for that description. I wasn't able to connect the dots, and that's what happens in underserved populations and the inequities. So what you're sharing with us is so vital and it's so important. I just wanted to thank you very much, but please keep on.
Sure, certainly. So our bill is called by us the Freedom to Choose bill, but it's technically the Managed Assistant Opt-out option. And so last year, we've been working on this for a couple of years now. And the first year, we got a lot of people to sign on. Jim Abler was the lead author on this. But due to, the different proportion of the two major parties that came in, that changed to Senator Wickland. And I do believe, there's a lot of names involved. I just hope I don't say someone's name, but
sure.
They were both, and Senator Mann, who is a doctor herself, is involved with this, but it just went through all the committees in the House. It passed the House. It went through all the committees in the Senate, passed the Senate. Governor Walz had no objections. And then it was yanked at the last minute to keep it out of the omnibus bill, because that whole thing was going to pass, because hospitals and MCOs, and specifically Hennepin Care Medical Center, said they can't afford to give this option to people because they would lose money. But
what do you want consumers to do? What does your organization invite consumers to do to, as you see it, protect the interest of the customer, the patient? And I believe you're saying that right now, the care system is not particularly driven by the interest and the needs of individuals who are seeking medical and health services, but rather by a process that tries to make big deals and make big money for big companies.
Well, that's what it appears. It's not something I really want to come out and say, because that could be slander. But the option for people to choose their own doctors, fee for service, would allow them to go to anyone. It would be back to the 60s in the sense that they don't have to be within a network. And
Sure.
And so, because HMOs are always saying that, oh, we do the best job, we have the best care, we know what we're doing, and everyone, we give them great care.
Mr. Mack,
Go ahead.
excuse me, Carol. It brings me back to the saying that you always use. We do the work. How is it again? Could you?
We get the misery, they get the money. That's it. Listen, I think we're out of time with this conversation. Carol, thank you so much for
Thank you,
being here.
Carol.
We're going to put your phone number where people want more information, they want to act or get activated. They can reach out to you. The number is in the screen right below us, and we invite people to reach out to Carol and to her colleagues at Health Policy Advocates. And if you want to register your concerns with the Minnesota Senate, here's the number, 651-296-0504. You want to support the bill that Carol and the advocates are bringing forward, that's how you do it. Carol, thank you so much. Are you or someone you know recovering financially from the COVID-19 pandemic, the lockdown, or any other reason? If so, help is available. Findhelp.org is a site to find a wide range of resources, including food, medical care, and more. The best part is based on your zip code. Visit findhelp.org, enter your zip code and the service you need. You'll get a map directing you to the organizations that can help you. Help is waiting at findhelp.org. If you need help starting anew, findhelp.org is the site for you. Carmen, let's get back to you before we bring in our friends Gary and Greg.
Wow.
Gary Prevost is here along with Greg Klave, and we're going to be talking about Cuba. I got a bunch of things to cover, including, labor resolutions, U.S. cities. There's a lot of energy now around U.S. Black youth solidarity with Cuba. And we want to talk about Latin countries who are supporting Cuba and more. So we've got a lot of good stuff to talk about. But before I bring them in time to talk about National Hispanic Heritage Month, I'm going to drop it in your lap. Talk about it.
Yes, yes. For us, the Latinos, we do this every day, but it's a wonderful time to share with our brothers and sisters our rich history and what connects us. I want to thank you, Mr. Mack, for bringing attention to Afro Latinos, Afrodescendientes, and for helping me launch Conversaciones de Salud, which was a part of Conversations with Al McFarland. And as I work, especially with youth, it's been so rewarding to see the connection that they embrace, learning about the diaspora and how many more slaves were sent to Latin American countries than to here to the United States, and how we have so many similarities. Through Insight News, I was able to write a couple of those stories that today still resonates with folks. And so I'm excited to hear our guests, what they have to say, and to bring this national attention, because sometimes we get so caught up with what's happening right here that we forget that we're a global brother and sister. And so I look forward to our next guest.
Wow. Well, let's talk about you, though, and the fact that you found your way from Brooklyn to Twin Cities. How did that happen? What's the story on your migration to the Midwest?
Yes. So I was punished.
To the frozen North.
I was punished because for many reasons, but among them was that I thought everybody was Puerto Rican. I thought Jesucristo was Puerto Rican. And so I came from a Pentecostal family, and I asked too many questions, and I didn't like school. I liked the streets. So I was given the option of going to Puerto Rico with the family or going to the Midwest with an aunt and who had 6 kids, and she needed help. So my father showed me a map, and Puerto Rico was out there, a little spot on the map in the middle of the ocean. But Wisconsin was only that far away. So I thought, I'll go to Wisconsin. I can always walk back. And so that's how I wound up in the Midwest. And my background in community service was really when I first noticed the inequities in the Midwest, and my Mexican counterparts, the Chicanos, didn't speak Spanish because their parents wanted them to assimilate. And in the Puerto Rican household, you had to speak Spanish, and you had to speak English. There was no if and ands or buts about it. So that's how I wound up in in Minnesota.
Uh,
And
we got a couple of graphics to show too, but one is, what does the word dream mean to you? We hear that a
yes,
lot. What does that mean?
so oftentimes we think that a dream is, we ate too much night before, or we're not. Uh, it's a warning, but to me, it's more of God or the universe or that spirit talking to me. And I've always had a reoccurring dream that I'm going to Puerto Rico and I can never get off the plane. I can't find my uncle. I can't find the house. I can't do anything. And one day I got a dream that I did get a hold of my uncle's wife, my auntie Carmen, and she held my hand and she put my hand on my right breast and had me move my fingertips. And I woke up and I felt a bump.
Mm,
And so I did what every Latino does, took out the Vicks, put some Vicks on, try to squeeze it, try to put hot cloth on it, cold cloth. 8 o'clock in the morning, I called the American Cancer Society, and they connected me with the Virginia Piper Cancer Institution or hospital here, and I was by 2 o'clock. I was told I had stage 1 breast cancer.
wow.
Within 10 days, I had stage 3 breast cancer,
Mm,
and so
mm,
I had to go through all the treatment. And while I was going through radiation, because you have to stand very still, and you had 15 minutes, you can't speak, you can't do anything. So I saw myself as, you loser, what did you do? And I had to change that. And
mhm,
so again, I had a dream, and it was with my auntie, and she was sending me blessings. So I created this warrior.
mhm,
I saw myself every time that I was on that radiation table as a warrior, killing those cockroaches, the cancer
mm,
cells. And when I survived cancer, I decided to do an illustration. I call her Abuela Mamacita, because I'm a
mhm,
grandmother, but I'm still a mamacita, if you know what I
mhm,
mean.
mhm,
And my choice of weapon is the traditional chancla, where that's how you keep kids in line, is you take out the chancla. So to me, a dream is whether you call it a nightmare or you call it whatever. It's something we need to embrace, and we need to love and be thankful for. And so that's why that's my interpretation of dreams.
awesome, awesome. So, Carmen, what does a can of Goya beans mean to you?
So a can of goja beans. I've often wondered, and I've been asked, why do you do community advocacy? Why do you like to speak to people? How can you engage people? And I suddenly realized through having a conversation with Vash and a colleague of mine that my father was a bodeguero. He had a grocery store, and in that grocery store, there's that's our grocery store, me as a little girl in front of the store. And then inside the store was all these cans of Goya beans, Goya salsa, Goya everything like that. So um, I suddenly realized that because of that bodega, that's how I did public speaking, customer service, and greeting people, making sure that they got what they wanted. And my father was real sticker about health and cleanliness. So my job was to sweep the front of the store, but you couldn't just sweep the front of the store. You had to sweep the whole block. And the blocks in
Mm,
New York, they're half a mile. But that gave
mm,
me the opportunity to greet people, say hello, sweep their steps, and I think those were the skills that today I use
mhm.
when I do community advocacy and engagement. So a can of Goya beans means much more than rice and beans. It means the creating community.
What's fascinating is that, your story and mine parallel each other so much. My parents also owned a grocery store
Yes,
when I grew up in Kansas City, right? So in the 50s,
yes.
maybe by the time I was in sixth grade, I was a butcher, working behind the counter at the meat, doing regular, real butcher work,
Wow.
and then running the front. My sister ran the front of the house. and my dad had an extra job, and my mom was having babies. So my sister and I were running the company when we were sixth graders and seventh, eighth, ninth graders. But that's a story that you've experienced as well.
Yes.
Final question
Yes.
before we bring extra guests in. Red lipstick, what does that mean? ¿Qué significa?
I'm sorry, my hearing went off.
What does red lipstick mean to you?
Okay, so growing up Pentecostal, the uniform was a long black skirt and a white blouse, and of course the Bible, and so no makeup, no anything. But my auntie that I was named after, Carmen Robles, would always tell me, "Mija, a woman is never dressed unless she has pintalabio colorado, unless you have a red lipstick on." And so I would tell my father, "Papi, I'm going to church, I'm going to school." I'd turn around the corner, lift up my skirt way high, right to my knees, and take out the lipstick that my titi gave me, and I would put it on and just grab a train and go somewhere that wasn't school or church, thus getting put on the Greyhound bus and sent to Wisconsin. So whenever I see red lipstick, I think of my auntie and how she gave me that sense of femininity, and that it was okay to wear red lipstick. This painting was created from a story I wrote for Insight News by a artist friend of mine who took my story and some pictures I had and created this picture of my watching my Titi Carmen put on her red lipstick. And she also had a traveling mole, lunar, we call it. And sometimes she would put it by her eye, and sometimes she would put it by her.
Traveling mole. Okay.
Yeah, the traveling mole. So,
Carmen, before we bring our extra guest on, our additional guest on, you have an inspirational quote, something that keeps you focused. What is it?
Cesar Chavez. I marched with Cesar Chavez. I had the honor of marching with him. I'm from Brooklyn. I'm always looking for a fight. I'm always, got issues, got put on a bus. And he taught me how to have faith and how to seek justice through calm and through educating others. And so this quote has always resonated with me. Once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore. So when I hear Carol talking about this bill and what's happening, I'm so excited because that's why I do Conversaciones de Salud, to plant the seed, to educate. And once people have that, they are lit and they go on their own. So thank you for letting me share that.
Well, thank you. Let's bring in our additional guest now, Professor Emeritus Gary Prevost. He's with Latin American Studies at St. John's University, and Greg Klave of the Minnesota Cuban Film Festival. Professor, let me go to you first. How you doing? Welcome, bienvenido, and thank you for being here today.
Bienvenido, y Carmen, tú eres una inspiración para todos.
Gracias, caballero.
And so, set the stage for this conversation, Greg, not Greg, but Professor. How do we look at the status, the state of affairs between? There's an event you just had a few days ago, I think, that focused on Cuba-U.S. relations. Talk about that first of all.
Yes, this is a very difficult time, both for Cuba and for the United States. The Cuban economy is in a very difficult state. The combination of the impact of the world economy in the wake of the pandemic, and then very specific policies that were pursued by the Trump administration, and unfortunately, in many instances, continued by the Biden administration. The particular policy of the Biden administration that we in the Solidarity Movement have been focused on for the past year has been the question of Cuba's presence on the United States list of countries that sponsor terrorism, a list that was created back in the early 1980s, reflecting the adversaries of the United States without real judgment as to whether they really were countries that were engaged in terrorism. And Cuba was on that list from 1982 until 2016, when, as part of the review of Cuba policy and the opening to Cuba policy of the Obama administration, Cuba was removed from that list, quite rightly so. In our program, which the graphic is shown there, that we did on the 5th of October was really focused on why it is so hypocritical for the United States to label Cuba as a country that sponsors terrorism. A year ago, the Association of Caribbean Nations, CARICOM, decided that on October 6th, 2023, that the anniversary of the bombing of a Cubana Airlines flight in Barbados in 1976 would be marked throughout the Caribbean and hopefully around the world as a reminder that Cuba was one of the first countries to be a victim of terrorism in the airline industry, when enemies of the Cuban Revolution, operating with the knowledge of the United States government, placed a bomb on a Cubana Airlines flight bound from Barbados to Cuba. It blew up, killing all on board, including the Cuban national fencing team. And so that was the focal point of our program. Was a brand new documentary that's been developed by a Chicano filmmaker in Los Angeles, documenting the whole history of that bombing and the people that carried it out, their complicity with members of the CIA and the like. So that was the focus of that particular program. But it's part of a campaign that we've been engaged in since October last year to get Cuba removed from the terrorism list. It's a multifaceted program of education and political pressure aimed specifically at the president, because the authority to remove a country from that list lies with the White House. Not with Congress, not with other bodies. It lies with the White House. So we have been pressing the Biden administration over the course of this last year to have Cuba removed from that list. So that's the context of it, because being on the list, just to finish this thought, being on the list has great consequences for Cuba's integration into the international economic system. Basically, it becomes very difficult for Cuba to do business around the world, even with countries who have no embargo or boycott on Cuba itself, and that's most of the nations of the world. But because their products that they often would provide to Cuba, that Cuba paying for them, have components that are manufactured in the United States, they are blocked from those sales as the result of Cuba being on the list of state sponsors of terrorism. Banks that finance this kind of commercial relations are extremely reluctant to participate in such transactions. When the ambassador from Cuba to the U.S., deputy ambassador, was here last year, he pointed out they couldn't even purchase spare parts for airplanes that they have of a Russian origin, because even Aeroflot, the Russian national airline, uses parts from the United States. And so they were constrained from doing that. So that's the context of why we are focused right now on the unfair continuance of Cuba on the list of nations that sponsor terrorism when they, in fact, are a longstanding victim of terrorism.
So Greg Klave joined the conversation here. It seems that certain cities and labor organizations are advancing resolutions to challenge that. Am I correct in that? Or what's the status?
Yeah, exactly. The American people really have spoken to say that they've had enough of the blockade of Cuba and having them on the sponsors of terrorism list. The Solidarity Movement in the United States has passed 100 resolutions in major U.S. cities and labor resolutions condemning the embargo. Of course, the UN will vote again this November in a vote of approximately 190 to 2. Traditionally, all the nations, all America's allies have voted against the United States. These resolutions that have been passed in the United States represent over 55 million citizens of the United States. So again, back to Gary's point, this is all on the head of President Joe Biden. And part of this excitement that we see, and also the discussion that you had on healthcare in the United States and how it disproportionately affects people of color, immigrants, is the U.S. Black Youth Solidarity Movement that's growing in this country to not only recognize this injustice by the American foreign policy, but also the injustice that's perpetrated on the American people by these corporate predatory capitalist systems that feed off of the working people. And so one instance that these youth recognize is that in Cuba, they have a universal health care system, and they have higher age mortality age, like they grow older in Cuba than in the United States.
Right.
And also the infant and maternal mortality rates are incredibly lower than the United States. And this is definitely seen in populations of color. And I was recently there in April and May with a contingent of 350, mostly Black youth from the United States, seeing Cuba's healthcare system and how they have doctors in every neighborhood. Not only do they have the clinics in every neighborhood that they can go directly see, no cost, but also those clinics, those doctors and nurses go into each home and see the social aspects of the family and how it affects their health. And so this is the kind of system that you see Americans wanting in this country. And this is the example, not only in healthcare, but also in education. There's no other country that has a literacy rate higher than Cuba. The only country is Norway. No other Western country has a higher literacy rate than Cuba, 99.5%. So this is an example and why Cuba is leading to this today, this year. Cuba is head of the group of 77 plus China. This represents over 100 countries and over 80% of the world's population asking for a different order in this world than they have been under the foot of.
Do you see the change happening? Is it likely that progress will occur? I mean, I raised the question, Greg. I've thought this personally, internally, given that Cuba has one of the highest literacy rates in the world, most education, best healthcare system in the world, one of the best. How is it that that genius and ingenuity could not overcome the negative impact of the blockade? How could the interest of United States be so pervasive and so massive that it almost was successful in extinguishing opportunity in life for ordinary people in Cuba? Even saying that, though, I have to acknowledge this phenomenal resilience in the face of phenomenal pressure and oppression. The Cuban people still rise and still demonstrate an affinity and a love for life and a possibility of change. What do you think, Greg?
Well, I think that relates to their national motto is unity in strength, strength in unity, that they have to be a united people in order to combat that. I'd like to read a quote from Helen Yaffe's book, and I encourage everyone who is interested in Cuba to get this book. It's called We Are Cuba by Dr. Helen Yaffe. For 60 years, Cuba has defied expectations and flouted the rules. It is a country of contradictions, a poor country with world-leading human development indicators, a small island that mobilizes the world's largest international humanitarian assistance, a weak and dependent economy which has survived economic crises and the United States blockade, anachronistic but innovative, formerly ostracized but with millions of ardent defenders around the world. Despite meeting most of the Sustainable Development Goals set by the United Nations in 2015, Cuba's development strategy is not upheld as an example. These contradictions require explanation. Cuba is a mystery, but you have to try to understand that mystery. And I think the United States is afraid of the example of Cuba and that a better world can exist. And
Well,
when
you think
when
about
Americans
that,
go to Cuba,
mm-hmm.
they are amazed
Mm-hmm.
at the type of society that's there and the Cuban people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's said that by travel industry that Cuba ranks the highest of countries that when people visit, they want to back.
Hmm. Well, I think about Cuba and the blockade and, its movement in 1959 towards independence and breaking out of the sphere of influence of the Yankee North. And I also think then about Haiti, its revolution, probably some would say the most important revolution in the New World. African people taking arms up against European colonists, oppressors, and succeeding in overthrowing, one of the greatest powers in the world. But look at the consequence. The consequence is that the conspiracy of the European world has guaranteed perennial impoverishment and a fate that is as bad as slavery for the people of Haiti. And so it seems like the Euro-American world wanted to replicate that lesson that it felt proud of. And, in Haiti, they blamed the Haitians. They didn't blame the capitalist exploitation the murderous imposition of rule on brown and black bodies in Haiti by Europeans. They blamed the black people for their inability to improve their lot, while all the time they encircled them globally with punishing policies and practices that ensured they would never emerge and enjoy the victory of freedom. That was the playbook, it seems to me, for Cuba, and it is today. What's going to happen? Greg, go ahead Greg.
Gary,
yeah,
take
I have a few.
Take that.
Yeah, I have just a few thoughts on that. This is a moment of a world in change, but a world which has not yet changed, and that's why Cuba is in such a difficult position. Because the reality is that Euro-US dominated world, which is mainly done through the financial institutions and a system of banking called the SWIFT system, is still very much in place. It affects even the commerce of countries like China, which in many ways still depend upon and are a part of that Euro-United States world banking system. And so that's why the speech that Diaz-Canel gave at the UN 2 weeks ago was very much geared on behalf of the Group of 77 plus China, and other speeches, including by President Lula of Brazil, are calling for a change in the economic system of the world, a change away from the dominance of the dollar and the euro. And those efforts are underway, but they're at this point still at the birthing stages. That would, among other things, potentially make countries able to do their relations independent of the dollar and the euro. The Chinese are starting to move in that direction. The Russians, by the circumstances of the war, are being forced to do that. And this is the world that the global South, Russia, China, to a degree India, are looking to birth. And it would be a world that in which countries would have much greater economic sovereignty to do their own ways without being sanctioned or judged by the U.S. Euro system. But it's not yet in place. That's the unfortunate reality, especially for Cuba in this moment. That system which, Al, you talked about, that punished Haiti in the 19th century, is still very much there to punish those in the 21st century that would seek to challenge the United States Euro domination. So that's the reality. But we are seeing positives. We're seeing this call for the new international economic order, which was first birthed in the 1970s, returning to the fore with much greater weight now, in part because of the weight of China as a true economic rival to the United States.
And therefore, our government, the U.S. government, and I think Western media in general, have simply ramped up the propaganda against Cuba. How do you describe that, and what should we expect? How do we think critically about the disinformation that continues to flow, that takes responsibility away from us towards principles of democracy, and that allows us to use a shorthand to discount life in Cuba and life of resistance against Euro-American oppression as inconsequential and therefore a sideshow? You mentioned China and you mentioned Russia. And what the propaganda machine does is make ordinary people fearful of Chinese investment in Africa and South America and other places. And it makes people question Russian investment while on the one hand, there's been a marked lack of investment that was beneficial to the populations of the Southern world. And so this propaganda, from my point of view, seeks to explain and rationalize why the global South was kept in a position of being exploited for the creation of wealth by the global North and blamed for its position by its own failures. Greg, what do you think?
Yeah, exactly. The United States has used these sanctions now in over 35 countries, and almost all those countries are of the global South. Countries that the system of exploiting the resources of those nations while at the same time making them dependent on the US market for the things that they need is a form of slavery. And this is very similar to Haiti in the 19th century. When they became independent and declared their freedom, France said, "Oh, you owe us now for making all those slaves that were our property free. You owe us
reparations." They wanted
reparations.
And they got reparations.
Yes.
And they've been collecting ever since.
Yes, exactly. And so, how do we get out of this? Well, we have a communication systems based on the internet that is bringing us closer together. We cannot only rely on US media for our information. We have to go beyond that, and especially the corporate media chain that keeps one-sided propaganda, making everything look bad, and us as the exceptional country on top of the world, and begin to go to independent journalists that are doing investigative reporting and listening to both sides of the story. One of the problems with the propaganda machine and the US media is that they put journalists in these countries that have no background at all in the history of what went on in that country, or US, say with Cuba, US-Cuba relations. And so all they do is describe what they see, but not the background. It's kind of like, how we're described in the United States, but they don't say anything about the disparities that have been created by the system, people of color. We're going to be having a award-winning Afro-Cuban independent journalist come to the Twin Cities October 30th through November 3rd. And I believe one of the first nights, October 30th, Monday, she'll be at the URock campus in North Minneapolis, showing a documentary and talking about, that's it right there, talking about, she'll be the first, this will be the first film in which a Black Cuban journalist questions mostly white Cuban American decision makers and leaders about US policies that disproportionately impact Black Cubans on the island. It's the same situation in the United States.
Well, that's a discussion that has been suppressed forever. I mean, it was the same discussion in Jamaica, where if you 20 years ago asked Jamaicans about racialism in Jamaica, they would say, "Oh, we don't see color in Jamaica, except for that white people ran everything and Black people had a chance to cut cane." And the same story you'd hear in Brazil, right? Where they carried the propaganda saying that we are not color conscious. Puerto Rico, same thing, not color conscious, but the reality, the numbers reflected that the oppressed were people with Black and brown skin, and that Black was really considered a liability, not an asset. Black culture equal to no culture, and the false arrogant elevation of European culture as the standard for what is good and what is true and what is right. All that is changing. It must change, and it's changing right now. Well, listen, talk more, Greg, if you would, about the work of the Minnesota Cuba Committee, and talk about how people can go to Cuba. I know the door seemed to open for a minute, or about to be open when Obama opened up, but closed again with the Trump administration. Where do things stand right now? How accessible is travel and engagement in Cuba? And how much can Cubans also move out of Cuba, even into North America or the U.S.? What's the story, Greg? And
right now, if one was go to the internet, you would see, in regards to U.S. traveling to Cuba, U.S. citizens traveling to Cuba, you would see that tourism is illegal. Yet you can, under general regulations, an American can easily get a ticket on American Airlines to Havana. And all they have to do when they buy that ticket is to click on to one of 10 boxes that one would click on to the support of the Cuban people, or people to people, however they call it, general license, and they'd be off to Cuba. The thing is that if one would go there as a tourist, you would never get a background into Cuban society. You really need to go with one of the many groups that we sponsor, as well as others do. Witness for Peace has a number of great groups going there. We sponsor Pastors for Peace, which is historically very famous. The Venceremos Brigade, again, some of the first brigades of U.S. Solidarity activists that went there in the 1960s, continues to get today, as well as the May Day Brigade, which goes there on May 1st and is part of the biggest worker celebration in the world, that celebrates the rights of workers that they won by winning their revolution in 1959. So our committee works, our focus is to end the blockade of Cuba, and to poke whatever holes we can into that blockade in order to connect the American people and the Cuban people. But we also want to promote the scientific, academic, and cultural achievements of Cuba. And so we have our 15th annual Minnesota Cuban Film Festival will be starting in February of 2024, which we have dedicated to a well-known activist in Minneapolis, Joe Palin, who recently passed away. And like Carmen, he was a people that worked, was an activist that worked in the streets with the people. That's where the only true power for justice and peace can come from, in the streets.
We got to wrap it up.
It will not come from, I'm sad to say, our system.
Greg, thank you so much. Great program, great conversation. Thank you very, very much. Also, Gary Prevost, thank you so much for your awareness. Carmen, as always, good to see you. Thank you for hanging out with me. And to everybody else, thank you for being a part of this. Remember to go to YouTube Insight News and subscribe, like, and share. We're building community, and you are at the center of it. I'm Al McFarland. We'll see you next time. Take care.